All right, everybody, have a seat. We are back on the record in State versus Partin. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury before we proceed to the cross-examination. Any issues that need to be reported to the court? Excellent, doing very well, appreciate it. Mr. Pagan, you may proceed to cross whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Judge. Doctor, my name is Chris Pagan. I'm the defense attorney. We've never met until just moments ago, correct? Correct?
Correct.
Okay. And Melinda likes to say that I'm quirky, and I acknowledge that. One of my worst quirks is I have this anxiety about mispronouncing names, and then it gets hyped up when I'm working through it. Could you say your name for me so I say it right?
It's my last name is Correa. It's
Correa.
like hooray, Correa.
Hooray, hooray, hooray. All right. I will endeavor to say your God-given name the right way. Correa, Correa. Please bear with me. You've offered opinions in this case, correct?
Yes.
Okay, we have to talk on the record. But one thing is for sure, you're not offering an opinion as a medical expert as to the identity of whoever you believe caused abusive head trauma.
Correct.
All right. Your opinion doesn't extend to that.
Correct.
Okay. Your opinion does not extend to the mechanism of injury.
Correct.
Okay. It is a generalized term, abuse, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
To a certain extent.
Abuse can be lots of different forms and lots of different mechanisms, correct?
Correct.
And I think in your direct, you identified throwing someone to the ground, correct?
Those are different mechanisms that we see in abusive head trauma cases.
Right. You said shaking,
Correct.
striking.
Yes.
You're not telling this jury that based on medicine and based on your experience, you can tell them with the standard required, whatever abusive act it was.
Correct. That's not my role.
Right. The way I look at this, and you tell me if I'm wrong because you're the expert, you look at some symptoms and you reason backwards. And the symptoms that you saw in this case were subdural hemorrhaging
Correct.
and brain swelling.
Yes.
And from that, based on your education and experience, you reason back to abuse, ruling out accidental trauma.
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay.
I mean, I rely on other medical experts to give me that history, though, because, like I said, looking strictly at the imaging, I can't always tell you what happened.
Right.
Just like in a brain tumor case that looks like infection, I rely on the history from the medical doctor to say this child presented acutely with fever, and that will lead me toward infection versus a brain tumor that may
Right.
look very similar.
So what I'm hearing you're saying is you're a radiologist,
Correct.
correct? You did your residency in radiology.
Yes.
I think you said you did a fellowship in
Yes.
radiology. I think you said the residency at that time was 4 years, and maybe it's different now.
Correct.
Okay. And it was a 1-year fellowship,
Correct.
and then you've practiced for 20 years in radiology.
Correct.
You read scans, and that's your expertise, correct?
Yes.
And then you rely on maybe some other experts at Children's, other doctors, to reach some of the opinions that you've had in this case, correct?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's important in abusive head trauma that we look, it's not just one person necessarily coming to a decision. It's a medical diagnosis that we need to look at other things. And so many of us get together and we talked quickly about we have a child abuse team that meets weekly. So it's important that we rule out other things, medical diagnoses that may mimic abusive head trauma. Have we excluded any accidental head trauma? And
Right.
so it's more than just me saying I think it's child abuse. It's all of us getting together and making the correct medical diagnosis.
Okay. And one potential medical diagnosis is TBI, which stands for traumatic brain injury, correct?
Correct.
And within the spectrum of traumatic brain injury, there is abusive head trauma.
Correct. Yes.
Right? Because it's a form of TBI,
A
correct?
form of trauma. It's trauma to the head.
And there's even a diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome within that spectrum too.
Shaken baby is a term that's sometimes used to describe
describe a mechanism of injury.
Correct.
Right. A mechanism of injury would be here an undisclosed, unknown abusive act. Correct?
Well, I think shaken baby syndrome is a term that it's not as commonly used nowadays because it implies that shaking is the only thing that has caused injuries to the child.
Okay.
Not sure I quite understood your question.
Right. But it used to be a more predominant diagnosis, shaken baby syndrome.
Well, it used to be the name that we called it. You know, we've sort of evolved.
Right.
Shaken baby was sort of the term described. That didn't mean that the child was necessarily only shaken, but it was one of the mechanisms. I think as we've evolved, we now call it abusive head trauma, which is a little bit more inclusive term to include any cause of trauma to the child's head, whether
Okay.
it be shaking, striking, slamming.
Okay. But in shaken baby syndrome cases, there would be, upon presentation, oftentimes a lack of identifiable injuries to the head, therefore reasoning that it had to be a shaking mechanism because there wasn't any evidence for any other mechanism. Correct?
To a certain extent, if we don't see signs of impact, but we don't always see signs of impact. Kids falls on a soft surface. We may not see it if a kid is having, significant hemodynamic compromise. We may not see swelling, so we may not see impact injury. So like I said, it was a term that was described,
Right.
or that was used to describe shaking. Certainly there are case reports of perpetrators who say, all I did was shake a baby. I think
Right.
any of us who have children, again, go back to just using common judgment. We handle babies carefully because we know they can be easily injured.
Right. And then you would agree that the shaken baby syndrome diagnosis became at least disputed in medicine and law because biomechanical professionals opine that shaking wouldn't be able to cause sufficient force to cause subdural hematomas, brain swelling, and retinal hemorrhages.
Again, that's more of a legal issue than a medical issue.
Well, okay, go ahead, finish your...
So I don't think the vast majority of medical experts out there believe that shaking can cause injury to a child. Whether biomechanical studies can necessarily prove that, I think when we see babies that come in, I don't necessarily think that the child has to have been slammed down on something to have injuries. So I think shaken baby, I think that's what you're sort of referring to.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that as a doctor and a scientist, you can't exist in a vacuum, correct? You have to be open-minded to what other professionals, like biomechanical experts, have to say about the infliction of force as it relates to the body.
To a certain extent, I agree, but biomechanical studies, ideally, if we could do things properly, we take a bunch of babies out in the backyard and shake them, and that would show us what's going on, but we can't do that.
Right.
We have to rely on computer-generated models. I think we all understand the limitations of that.
Yes.
And so when we look at diagnosing abusive head trauma, shaken baby, whatever you want to call it, we not only have to look at medical experts, biomechanical studies, but our own clinical expertise and experience and judgment, which plays a huge part.
Correct.
So yes.
But you're certainly not pushing back on me, and you're aware of a multitude of biomechanical professionals who say the force from shaking is insufficient to cause injuries like subdural hematoma, subdural hemorrhaging, brain swelling, and retinal hemorrhaging.
I am aware of some literature that states that. I'm also aware of the vast majority of medical literature that says that abusive head trauma can occur from multiple means, including shaking alone.
Okay, and you indicated on direct that you were part of a child abuse task force that identifies and then prosecutes child abuse cases in local courts.
What I'm a member of is,
Just answer my question.
well, I think I need to explain it more if
Okay.
I could, please. The child abuse team is a team that meets weekly at Cincinnati Children's. I am one member. I've been a member since 1998. It's a group of medical professionals, which include child abuse physicians, me, sometimes we'll have ophthalmology and critical care physicians come, and then we have social services teams. We basically review on a weekly basis any child who is suspected of being abused. We are not there to say this child has definitely been abused. We are there to say we think this child may have been abused, this child may not have been abused. And so we're there to review all of the medical information to come to a kind of team approach. Because like I said, one thing does not make abusive head trauma. We have to look at all the pieces. It's always important for us to look at the entire patient, not just one finding.
I just asked if you were on the team.
I am on the team, yes.
Okay, thank you. And this will go easier if you just answer my questions.
Well, I think we need to understand what it was all about.
Well,
so.
I'm going to ask you to answer my questions, and if the prosecutor feels the need to redirect and elicit things, she'll do that. But please just be responsive to my questions, and this will go a lot easier. Good?
Sure,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. The child abuse team met on Hannah's case on March the 13th, 2018. You have to say yes or no.
Yes,
Okay, and you were present for that,
yes,
and you participated in that.
yes.
All right. And are you aware, strike that, you've come here today and made a diagnosis based on your expertise of abusive head trauma.
Yes,
Okay. Are you aware that coming out of the March 13th, 2018 child abuse trauma meeting, that the case proceeded on a shaken baby syndrome theory? Are you aware of that?
no, I don't quite understand what you exactly mean.
Okay. Were you part of the team that spoke with the investigating officers in the case?
I spoke to actually investigators the morning in the reading room. Reagan Kitzmiller, one of our social workers, brought them into the reading room that morning.
Okay. On March 13th,
March
2018?
March 8th, the morning the child came in.
All right, so you had contact with law enforcement on March the 8th?
Yes.
And then you had contact with law enforcement on March the 13th?
We basically meet in a room and there are lots of representatives there.
Okay. Do you remember if law enforcement was there or not, or has it been too long ago?
I don't remember specifically.
Are you aware that Lindsay was charged on March the 9th, 2018?
No, I wasn't aware necessarily of that.
Okay, and are you aware that the sworn charging document indicated that Lindsay Partin did knowingly cause a serious physical harm to a child by shaking her?
Objection, Your Honor.
Approach.
I apologize, Dr. Correa. Did I say it right? I did. All right. Were you aware that the initial charging document in this case, filed March the 9th, 2018, which was sworn, indicates that the physical harm that Lindsay inflicted was by shaking?
To be honest, no, not really. I mean, that's,
You had no part of discussions with law enforcement for them to form that view and then put it in a sworn statement?
I discussed with law enforcement, some of the things. The child had swelling externally at the
Right.
time, and I was aware very early on that the child had significant bruising because that was reported to me.
Okay, we're talking about shaking. Did you talk to the officer and give a statement that...
I did not give a statement, or I'm not, so no. I mean, again, shaking is a method of injuring a child.
Right. Are you aware of anybody from the Children's Hospital team that you work with that would have supplied a statement to the police that made its way into a sworn statement that, let me finish, that Hannah had been shaken to death?
No, I mean, I'm not aware of,
All right.
not exactly sure.
And you wouldn't remember whether or not the shaking mechanism, which again, you've come off of here when you say abusive head trauma. You're not saying this is a shaking mechanism, right?
I'm kind of confused on where we're going with the shaking. I mean, shaking is a method to injure a child.
Right.
This child had signs of external soft tissue swelling, which we would not necessarily see in a shaking child, which if you're implying that the child was only shaken, should not have impact.
I'm asking you
So-
questions. I'm not implying things.
Shaken baby is the name of, we call it non-accidental injury, non-accidental trauma, abusive head trauma, inflicted head trauma. There's lots of names given to someone inflicting trauma on a child.
Right, because there's lots of abusive acts that can occur.
Correct,
You don't know which one.
correct.
Somewhere along the way, the police got information that it was a shaking injury, but you don't know how, where, or what the circumstances of that were.
I don't know, yes, correct.
And you don't recollect it being a topic of discussion at the March 13th, 2018 meeting?
We would typically discuss, yes. I mean, could shaking have been caught, or could shaking have been involved? Yes. Could the child have been struck? Yes. Could the child have been slammed down? Yes. I mean, that's sort of what we do. Specifically, we do not take notes at that meeting.
Okay, well, I'm not talking
So,
about typically, I'm talking about this case, all right? And I'm trying to get to the bottom of where this shaking stuff came from, and you're saying you don't know. Right?
To me, when I look at this child, I see impact injury and that I see extracranial swelling.
Okay.
Could the child have been shaken? Absolutely. Do I think a 3-year-old can be shaken? Absolutely. Do I think shaking can cause these injuries in this child?
Are you
Absolutely.
telling the jury that this child was shaken today?
Could have been, yes, but I also see extracranial injury, so I know there was some impact to this child. Do I believe shaking can cause these injuries? Absolutely.
All right. You've given, I counted at least 3 opinions when you were on direct. Do you remember that? About acute swelling, about something else, and about abusive head trauma, right? You gave those 3 opinions, correct?
My medical opinion in this case is this child suffered
I didn't
abusive
ask
head
that question.
trauma.
I asked if you gave, just listen to my questions, please. You gave 3 opinions, correct? Yes? You don't know?
Please read back my opinions. I mean,
You talked about acute bleeding.
the child had acute bleeding, yes.
Right, you gave that opinion.
Correct.
Right, you gave the opinion about the abusive head injury, correct?
Correct.
Maybe another one I didn't get written down. Those were the opinions.
The
you gave.
brain swelling, yes, I
brain swelling.
agree. Yes, there is
Okay,
brain
so-
swelling.
All right, and then you were asked whether or not you held those within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, right?
Yes,
Do you understand that that is the only way that you can get an opinion before a jury, is if you hold an opinion within a reasonable degree of medical certainty? Do you understand that?
yes, sure.
Do you or don't you?
I guess I'm confused as to what you're asking
Okay,
me.
well, you just talked
Maybe
about
you need to simplify.
possibly shaking and all of that.
I'm not here
Well,
to.
let me finish.
Okay.
All right, and I'm trying to get you, I'm trying to get to you so you understand what I'm trying to get at. All right? Do you appreciate that you cannot give medical opinions unless they meet the legal standard? Do you appreciate that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you understand that you cannot give medical opinions based on possibilities? Yes? Do you understand that or not?
Yes, I mean,
Okay.
to a certain extent, yes.
What do you mean to a certain extent?
Yes, I understand that.
Okay. All right. So when you said it's possible that the injuries occurred by shaking, you would agree that that doesn't meet the legal definition of medically probable.
So if
You
I could,
answer my question.
if I could explain this.
I want you to answer my question and then explain it.
I'm sorry.
Answer my question first and then please
So
explain.
ask the question again, please.
All right. When you were talking to the jury about the mechanism of shaking, you said, I think it's possible. That's what you said, right?
These
Answer
injuries
my
in
question.
this child.
Is that what
yes,
you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Do
shaking
you
can.
understand that possibilities are not legally sufficient to support opinions in a court of law?
I understand that.
Okay.
Now, could I explain,
Do you-
please, what?
Well, let me finish.
Okay.
And then I'll let you follow up. Okay? So the statement about possibly shaking isn't an opinion that you could possibly hold within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, correct?
It's a possible mechanism for how a child could be injured.
Okay. But you understand that you can't offer an opinion based on possibilities.
I'm not here to give an opinion as to the mechanism of how the child was injured. I'm here to make the medical diagnosis of child abuse, abusive head injury.
All right.
So, which are 2 completely different things.
And just so it's clear, so this jury understands, you're not saying, I put my weight as a medical professional, as an expert, on an opinion that shaking was a mechanism of injury because it's only possible and not medically probable?
Again, I'm not here.
Answer my question and then follow it up.
Ask me the question again, because it's confusing how you're asking.
All right? And I don't mean to be confusing. I'm doing the best I can. And I think we might be talking from two different worlds.
We are.
Okay. So, we'll start again. I don't know how to say it any other way than this, and let me know if you understand it, okay? When we talk about a mechanism of injury like shaking, you're saying your testimony that it's possible is appreciated by you not to meet the medical standard or the legal standard of within a reasonable degree of certainty. You agree with that?
I'm sorry. I guess I'm not understanding what you're asking me.
Okay.
To me, I don't feel like I am here to say the mechanism how this child was injured. I'm not here to say this child was shaken, this child was slammed. That's not what I'm here to do. That's not what I do on imaging. I'm here to say this child has significant head trauma.
Correct?
How did this occur? Accidental, not accidental.
Right. Okay.
Is there something else that caused it? Does the child have a medical diagnosis that caused bleeding? Does the child have a coagulopathy? That's the role of the medical professionals to get together and say, we are making a medical diagnosis.
Yeah.
And the way we can figure out is, yes, unfortunately, a lot of children who are injured and have inflicted injuries, no one's there to say, yes, I saw, John Doe go out and shake this child or inflict injury on this child.
Right.
So we do have to use some, we have to look at the clinical history provided and figure out that, yes, the child has significant head trauma, no reported history of trauma, suspected of it being abused.
That's what I meant
I'm not
about-
here to say what the mechanism of injury. That's not my role as a radiologist.
Right. So you have no opinion about the identity of the perpetrator, right?
Absolutely
You
correct.
have no opinion about the mechanism of injury, correct?
Correct. In this case,
Correct.
I see soft tissue swelling extracranially, so at some point this child has swelling outside their head.
Correct.
The child has significant head trauma.
And then we did agree, and then hopefully I'll move on, but we did agree that you offered some opinions in the state's direct examination.
The child has subdural bleeding, brain swelling.
Right.
Yes,
And you also stated those opinions within a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
yes.
All right. Do you know what that means? Or did you testify to something you didn't understand?
I understand what that means.
What does it
To a
mean?
medical degree of certainty, I am confident that when I look at the imaging in relation to all the other findings, that
Yeah.
this child has been abused.
What is your level of confidence to meet
I'm-
the legal standard?
What is my level of
What
confidence
is
in this
that?
case? Very
Yeah, that-
confident.
Okay. All right. The prosecutor asked you, I'm going to ask you a good question that you'll be able to answer. The prosecutor asked you about head anatomy. Remember that?
Mhm.
Yes?
Yes.
All right. And I'm going to say something, and I want you to tell me if you agree or not. The dura is a membrane that surrounds the brain.
Correct.
Okay. The dura is not part of the brain.
Correct.
When you talk about subdural space, that's the space below the dura, which is a membrane around the brain.
Yes.
You're not talking about the brain.
Correct.
Correct. There's a membrane called the arachnoid membrane?
Yes.
All right. That's a membrane below the dura.
Correct. Yes.
There's a space below the arachnoid membrane,
Correct.
subarachnoid space.
Yes.
That's not the brain.
Correct.
Okay. There's a retina located in the eye.
Yes.
That is not in the brain.
Correct.
It's outside the brain,
Yes.
as well as the optic nerve outside the
The
brain.
optic nerve is an extension of the brain.
Below the brain.
It's an extension of the brain, but
Okay.
it's not the brain substance that we think of.
Thank you. You looked at images of the cervical spine.
Yes, there was a CT done at Fort Hamilton.
Right.
CT.
That revealed no trauma to the cervical spine.
CT, yes, it revealed, CT basically is looking at the bony structures,
Right.
and we don't see the spinal cord and ligaments well, which is why if a child comes in that we're suspicious for ligamentous injury, the child would typically get an MRI.
Right. But the
There were no fractures, and
to the
there was
skull or
normal
to
alignment.
the cervical spine or anywhere in the child's body.
There were no fractures, correct, yes.
And I think I asked you this, but the cervical spine is outside of the brain.
Correct, so your
Alright.
cervical spine, your neck.
So the only brain injury that you observed, the only injury to the brain was the swelling, correct?
The subdural bleeding outside and the swelling to the brain, which
Right.
is a significant finding, yes.
Right. The hemorrhaging caused mass effect.
Correct.
The mass effect pushed the brain past the midline,
Yes,
caused a herniation.
yes,
The brain swelling is what caused the lack of functionality in Hannah.
yes,
Her problems with consciousness and speech and eye movement, correct?
correct, and her blown pupils,
Right.
yes,
But the subdural hemorrhage occurred. That's bleeding outside of the brain,
yes,
pressing on the brain but outside of the brain.
yes.
The brain swelling was the brain injury.
Brain swelling is, yes, brain swelling is edema within the brain. It's not some people talk about primary and secondary injury edema. Some people will classify as a secondary injury. We don't, primary injury, people talk about like axonal injury or brain contusions or brain bruises. We did not see any of those in Hannah, which is not unusual in an abusive head trauma case, so.
You evaluated for a brain contusion and saw none.
Correct, and the CT, that's a very good study, yes.
Okay.
MR is better,
You evaluated for a brain bruise and saw none.
correct.
The primary concerning and ultimately fatal injury was the brain swelling.
The subdural pushing the brain as well as the venous injury, which then leads to the brain swelling, yes.
Right, all right. And I get that, but
We
the only...
can see subdurals that don't cause brain edema or pushing of the brain.
Yeah. And just
So there
the-
was a combination of things going on.
Right, and edema swelling.
Correct.
All right, okay. And I understand there's a combination of things going on, but there was a combination of things going on outside of the brain and inside the brain.
Yes.
And when you just focus on the inside of the brain, and I know that they're interconnected and one was causing the other, but again, it's brain swelling is the brain injury here. Caused
Correct, yes.
by the cerebral herniation, pressing down, mass effect, causing the herniation. Right?
I mean, the brain edema is not necessarily secondary to the mass effect. Like I said, when we see these injured veins, we not infrequently see this pattern of injury in kids where that whole hemisphere is abnormal. And on MR imaging, we would then see hypoxic ischemic injury to that part of the brain or lack of oxygen and perfusion, blood perfusion to that part of the brain. The
Could you say the last part again,
herniation,
please?
so lack of sort of oxygen or perfusion to that part of the brain. And that's what we saw on the subsequent studies,
The one on March 9th.
correct?
Right, all right. So, and maybe this is clear to the jury, maybe not, but Fort Hamilton Hughes did imaging initially by Dr. Brown.
Correct, yes.
And I think you said that those images were emailed to you because
They-
you were on call or you were working at Children's Hospital that morning.
Correct. They
So you-
weren't emailed, they're electronically sent into our system.
I see.
I mean, through our IT groups.
So
We
it's-
not infrequently get images from outside, from Dayton, from Columbus Children's, from lots of different places.
So you had a set of images taken at Fort Hamilton Hughes where the injury presented.
The child presented, yes,
Right. The child presented with those injuries
yes,
that are depicted in the scan from March the 8th.
yes.
Correct. And then there was another set of scans that you looked at post-operatively on March the 9th.
Later on March 8th. So there were
Post-operative.
3 sets of CT scans, the one at Fort Hamilton, the initial one at our hospital post-operatively, and then one on the 9th.
Right. Okay. All right, we'll, remember that, we'll get to that in a second. You gave an opinion that was hard for me to pick up specifically about the timing of the injuries relative to the onset of symptoms. That was one of the 3. And I guess that's the one I didn't write down. But that's one of the 3 that
So as far as what I think the timing of the injuries was.
yes.
So when I look at
What is your answer?
So when I look at a CT scan, I can't look at the color of the blood and say, this occurred 5 minutes ago, this occurred 1 hour ago, this occurred, 20 minutes ago. So I have to rely on what's going on with the child. When I see these type of injuries, I know that bleeding is caused by venous injury.
Right.
And in children that we see with these kind of injuries, they have an relatively immediate onset of symptoms. So child involved in a motor vehicle injury that comes in intubated into the trauma bay would have these injuries. A kid hit by a car in the scene is intubated because they're not breathing normally. So I do not see these type of imaging findings in a child that's running down the hallway.
Okay. You used, I wrote down the phrase, so we didn't cross, antenna here. You used the phrase relatively immediate. Is that the word you used?
Yes,
All right. We don't measure time like that. Relatively immediate. We don't say the word immediate and then modify it. We measure time in seconds.
I would say
Let me
within,
finish.
okay,
In seconds, or in hours, or in days. You understand that's a measurement of time.
yes.
Okay. Using a measurement of time, what was your opinion?
I would think within seconds of this child being injured, the symptoms started.
Okay.
This is not an injury I would have seen from the day prior.
All right. Do you have the opinion letter that you wrote in this case?
Yes,
Let me get to it. All right, and just so the jury understands. You testified as an expert before, correct?
yes,
All right. And when you're an expert, you write an opinion letter, correct?
yes,
And that opinion letter is provided to the prosecutor, correct?
yes,
Who supplies it to the defense so that they're aware of what the opinions are going to be in advance of trial.
yes,
All right. And when a defense attorney like me gets this letter, this is what they put on notice as to what you're going to say at trial, right?
yes,
So they can prepare for trial, yes?
yes,
So they can obtain their own experts, yes?
Yes.
So they can meet the medical evidence not on the fly, but in a way that they can prepare.
Yes.
Correct? You address timing in the 3rd paragraph, correct?
yes.
Okay. Where in that 3rd paragraph do you say within seconds? Just answer, you don't say it, do you?
I don't say it, no.
Okay. Where in that paragraph do you say relatively immediate? You don't say it, do you?
I don't say it.
All right. You use the word rapidly. That's the adverb you picked when you wrote this out December 17th, 2018.
I'm looking for the word rapidly.
Use it a couple of times. And it's the only word you use, I think. Tell me more.
Rapidly unresponsive, often unable to breathe on their own.
Right.
Devastating neurologic outcomes if they survive that sentence, yes.
You didn't use seconds, right?
Correct.
Okay. Are you... The issue of timing is very important in this case.
Yes.
You've understood that?
I do understand that,
All right.
yes.
You talked with the prosecutor about the issue of timing?
I understand the issue of timing is important in this case, yes.
Okay,
To a certain
that's not what I
extent.
asked you.
Again, my role is to diagnose abusive head injury.
Okay, and my role is to ask questions and have you respond to them. And my
Correct.
question was, did you talk to the prosecutor or law enforcement about the time frame in this particular case while you worked on it?
Yes, I did discuss, and as the case sort of evolved, we learned more information, so yes.
What do you think you know about the time frame?
I understand that there's a time period where there were 2 caretakers and the child,
Okay.
so
Were you provided with text messages to show when the child was coming or when the child arrived?
no,
Were you presented with call logs to show?
no.
Do you have any idea how long Hannah was at the babysitter's house at all in this case?
I know it's a brief period of time.
All right, well, did you discuss that with the prosecutor or law enforcement?
I
Yes or
didn't,
no?
at the time, I don't remember necessarily discussing the time. Again, I think I go back to what my role is to say when these injuries occurred, the child would not have been normal, and then it's up to law investigators to go out and figure out when was the child last normal.
And I appreciate that you want the jury to know what you think your role is. I'm asking you other questions, and I want you to respond to that.
I mean, I have
I
been
don't have a
given.
question for you. I get to ask the questions. The question is, in December of 2018, when you wrote this opinion letter, around that time, had you discussed with law enforcement, including the prosecutor's office here, a specific time frame that they understood for this case?
We had discussed, because we had sat down as a group and discussed this case, yes.
Okay. And at that point in time, what did you discuss so that you had a state of mind, so you had an understanding as to what the time frame was for Hannah being in the presence of the babysitter in this particular case?
My discussion has been relatively similar in that when those injuries occurred, from that point on, the child would not have been normal. And so
Okay, go on. Finish.
when was the child last normal?
Okay. My question to you was, did you discuss and review evidence about the amount of time that Hannah spent with the babysitter in this particular case?
I know it was a very brief period. I don't know specifics
The
necessarily.
question, you don't answer my questions. Did you discuss it first? Did you discuss it?
I mean, I have been in discussions, yes.
Who did you
where
discuss it with?
I've been with the prosecutors, I've been with the child abuse team.
Okay. When you discussed it, what information
I
was
I have since met with, I think Kathy Makaroff was there at the time. I don't remember if I think the coroner was actually there. The medical examiner was actually there when we discussed the case,
who
so.
was there to discuss it?
To be honest, I'm sorry, I don't remember, but we have met several times about this
Okay.
case.
Well, on March the 13th, 2018, that's the child abuse day.
Yes.
All right. And then many times after that?
We've met a couple times since then, which is not unusual for us when we're
After
looking at
March
these
the
cases.
13th, 2018, what is the next time that you remember meeting with other people on the timeline in this case?
I don't know a specific,
Okay.
to be honest.
To the next time who was present?
Like I said, I remember meeting with Kelly Hiley, and I think the coroner was there, or the medical examiner was there, and
Right.
Kathy Makaroff, who was also involved in the case.
The
I
detective?
think, I don't remember if the detective was there.
Right. Did you review either a report or a phone dump that demarcated the time that Hannah was present at the babysitter's house? Did you?
I was provided information that, yes, she was there a very short period of time
Right.
between when she was dropped off.
So you were supplied information to look at? Yeah?
I was given that information,
What were
yes.
what were you given? Why are you being so coy? What were you given?
I was given that the father dropped the child off. The child was taken by the babysitter, and the dad was driving to work and received a phone call very shortly thereafter that Hannah had collapsed, something along those lines.
And who told you this?
To be honest, it's in the medical record, I believe, in Epic. It's Kelly Hiley probably has supplied that to me, the prosecutors.
So medical records, were you given any other documentation? How about a police report?
I don't usually see a police
How
report.
about text messages?
No,
How about a phone log?
no, we've already
What time was
discussed that.
911 called?
I don't know.
What time was Hannah's father called?
I don't know.
What time was Hannah dropped off?
I don't know. I think she was dropped off about an hour before she went to Fort Hamilton, or within the hour, I was told at some point.
So you had all this information in your head about the timeline and the importance of the time, and you write me a report that says rapidly.
Correct.
You use that term, that adverb, rapidly, knowing the critical aspect of timing in this case, and that's what you choose to use, right? Yes?
Yes,
And for the first time in the history of this case, on cross-examination, you bring up a unit of time within seconds. Yes?
yes,
All right. You've testified in other cases on the timing issue. Yes? In this courthouse.
yes.
You testified
To
in
a
the Brad
certain
Young
extent.
case. Yes?
I have testified in timing cases, yes.
Okay.
So, again,
That's
when
fine. I don't have a question.
within seconds or rapidly, it doesn't matter what time she was dropped off. What I'm saying is, from the time that child suffered those injuries, she would not be doing normal things. So then, that's sort of, then we need to look at what else was the child able to do at that time. So I can't look, like I said when we were initially talking, I can't simply look at the imaging and say, this bleed is an hour old, this bleed is 5 minutes old or 20 minutes old. We have to look at what the child was doing, and that's what I do all the time.
Yeah.
I correlate my imaging findings with what's clinically going on with the child.
Yeah, okay. You continually brought up Dr. Stevenson in this
Dr.
case.
Stevenson, yes.
Okay, Dr. Stevenson was working that day on March the 8th, 2018, correct?
Yes, he was the neurosurgeon on.
He performed the surgery on Hannah on March the
Yes.
18th, let me finish. On March the 8th, 2018?
Yes,
All right. You read the scans and communicated with him in preparation for that surgery.
yes.
You discussed the case with him post-operatively.
We did, yes. I
Okay.
think that's documented in both my reports.
You were in close communications with Dr. Stevenson throughout the day on March 8th with respect to Hannah, correct?
Yes,
All right. Are you aware that Dr. Stevenson made a statement that the injuries had a 24-hour bracket period?
no, I was not aware
Did
of
you
that.
discuss that with Dr. Stevenson?
To be honest, Dr. Stevenson and I discussed the imaging findings and what was necessary for surgical purposes. We did discuss what had happened. Do we know what happened to the child?
Right.
We did discuss abusive head trauma. He called me and told me when he got to the operating room and saw the child that the child had significant bruising.
Okay.
But beyond that conversation, which was relatively brief, our main concerns were not, did the child suffer abusive head trauma at that point? Our main concerns were treating the child. So, to be honest, beyond that initial discussion, the follow-up conversation that I had after surgery did not really even deal with abusive head trauma or not. It was, does the brain look better? Is the midline shift gone? That's sort of my role at that point.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that very long answer about what you talked about, but we're talking about timing. And I presented you with information that Dr. Stevenson had indicated a 24-hour look-back period. And you're saying you didn't know about
I
it.
did not know that, and I
Alright.
wouldn't necessarily have that conversation with him.
All right. You would agree with me that a matter of seconds is different than 24 hours? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. You would agree with me that you are in conflict with your view about the look-back period, where Dr. Stevenson says 24 hours and you say seconds.
Objection,
I'm
Your
in-
Honor, we may approach on this.
Let's approach. So I can disregard that last question and any answer there too. Mr. Pagan, you may continue.
Dr. Correa, I'm going to hand you a transcript from a case, and I'm going to proffer to you that this is testimony you gave under oath in a prior trial.
Okay.
And I'm going to label this Defense Exhibit A. And what I'm labeling is State of Ohio versus Brad Young. You testified in that case.
I'm probably the first to stand and take the state's laptop. Oh, okay.
Is that good? Okay. I'll give you the page number. I didn't see it. Okay. Do you see at the top where there are numbers? Top
Yes.
right? Okay, we'll do that. First of all, on page 48, do you see your name? Down at
Page
the, line
40
17.
Yes,
All right. Is that spelled right?
yes,
Okay. And that's you.
yes,
And you remember testifying in the summer of 2016 in the state of Ohio versus Brad Young.
yes.
You don't
I
remember?
don't remember, to be honest, I usually remember the trials by the child's name, not as much the people that are being accused, because
Okay.
I'm dealing with the patients.
And I'm trying to remember her name. That's right.
Okay,
Do you remember that
Yes.
victim? Okay. And you testified as an expert.
yes,
You testified as an expert radiologist.
yes,
You read Kinsley's, say it right? Kinsley's scans.
yes,
All right. And the case was similar to the one we have here in that the diagnosis was abusive head trauma
correct,
with the presentation of the brain swelling, the hematoma, and the retinal.
correct. Well, I'll give you that much at this point.
Okay. And the issue in the case was the timing of the injury with respect to the onset of symptoms. Yes? Do you remember that or not?
I don't remember her imaging because children with abusive head trauma present with different types of bleeding and different types of brain swelling.
Okay.
So that would make a difference.
Yes. How about this? Do you remember her presenting to Atrium Hospital initially with a pretty healthy brain scan? And then 2.5 hours later, presenting to Children's Hospital with a progressively swelling brain.
I don't remember the specifics, unfortunately. If I can read through, if you have images from that case I can look at, there are times when the swelling is very different and the bleeding is very different. So that makes a difference.
Find a page for you to go to.
I'm sorry, I see lots of patients.
What's that?
I'm sorry, I see lots of patients. I don't really remember I do remember the name, and yes, if you can help me
Well,
find a
okay.
page.
I will, but I'm going to examine you a little bit about your memory about it. Do you remember that there was also an issue in the Kinsley case?
Kinsley.
I'm sorry?
Kinsley.
Kinsley case, that there had been falls prior to the presentation at Atrium Hospital.
I'm sorry, falls?
There had been falls, right? And the issue in the case was, for you,
Your Honor, I'm going to object if we can approach.
Let's approach.
Well, I think I'm going to have the witness refresh her recollection so that she can answer questions about her opinions in this case. And I didn't know how you wanted, I mean, it might take some time, so I didn't know how you wanted to.
I think probably you'll need to ask the questions. If she's not able to remember, then you can
All right.
help direct her. She can refresh, then we can.
Could I ask you a question?
No,
Did
you
this-
can't. You can't
Okay.
ask me questions. But I can ask you this one, which is, would it aid your ability to answer questions if you had the opportunity to refresh your recollection by reading the transcript?
I'm looking at a couple things right now, yes.
Would it help you?
Yes.
Okay. And would you like to take your time and do it in a way that you're not being eyeballed by a jury and feel pressure?
Nah.
Mr. Pegg, is that your subtle way of indicating like you will recess it?
I was trying to give a hint to the witness, but I don't know if she did.
A hint to the witness that I'm okay. I'm quick glancing through. This one is- My question would be easy, and if you can't answer, did this child?
Well, I can't,
did this-
we can't,
okay.
we just can't do it that way.
Okay, I think this child, from what I
I don't have a
can,
question in front of you.
from what I can quickly
I don't have a
remember.
question in front of you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought you wanted me to read through and provide an opinion. As
No,
to-
no.
Oh, okay.
I want you to tell me whether or not your recollection is refreshed in this case, having had sufficient time to review the
I
transcript.
haven't had sufficient time, but I've had some time to look at it,
Have
so.
sufficient time. This is an important case. Take the time you need. Do you need extra time?
It would be helpful if I could read through it, yes, because
Right.
I think her imaging findings were very different than the imaging findings, but I don't know that, just
Let me interject
briefly
real
looking.
quick. Doctor, approximately how long would you like to have to review through that and feel comfortable enough that you would be able to answer the questions?
I mean, we could start with 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we, ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you a 15-minute break period. Once we've, and I guess I'll allow the attorneys maybe to consult the witness at the end of 15 minutes or so to see where we're at on it. So we'll start with that. Keep your lanyards on, keep your notepads in the room, leave them here. Admonitions, no talking, no researching, etc. And we'll look about 20 till 5, see how we're looking, and then we'll see if we're going to proceed with this evening or if we maybe need a longer period. So, all right, we will go off record. Ms. Pagan,
Thank
if
you,
you are ready to resume,
Yes.
please do such.
Okay, Dr. Correa.
Yes,
Okay, I said it, right. You have the transcript in front of you?
yes.
All right, it's labeled Defense Exhibit 1A.
A.
Okay. And you've reviewed it and refreshed your memory about your testimony in the case.
Yes.
Okay, so here are the questions I have. Go to page 81, line 17. Okay. Do you remember being asked in the summer of 2016 in this Brad Young case, while testifying and under oath, are you able to make a determination from a progression forward in time as to when the insult would have occurred in the reverse from the initial image? Maybe you have to look at me. Do you remember being asked that? Do you remember being asked that question?
Now that I've read it, yes.
Okay. And looking at me, do you remember your answer? Do you remember your answer?
I don't remember exactly what I said at that point, but I can tell you what I would say now, which I would guess.
No,
would be
we're not doing it that
similar.
way. We're doing it under the rules of evidence. So you don't remember what you said?
No, but
Okay.
I can,
You don't remember what you were said, right?
correct.
Okay. You said, yeah, I can't look at this image and say it occurred 3 hours ago. I can't look at it and say, exactly when it occurred. But what I can say is that in the two hour, there's been a pretty significant progression of the brain swelling, and so I would expect the injuries to have occurred about the time the child actually presented to Atrium, somewhere close to that time period. I certainly wouldn't expect this to have occurred from a motor vehicle collision 3 or 4 days before. That was your answer, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then, looking at me, you were asked, and when you say close to the time the presentation at Atrium, that would be then within hours as opposed to days. Do you remember being asked that question?
Not necessarily,
You've
no.
you've looked at the transcript, and I'm not making it up, correct?
Correct.
You were asked that question. Yes?
Yes.
And you responded under oath. Yes?
Yes.
As an expert? Yes?
Yes,
All right. A year and a half ago, 2 years ago, correct? Yes?
yes.
Okay. And you, looking at me, do you remember what your answer was?
I've looked at my answer.
Okay. And you said correct, yes, within hours. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. On direct examination, I heard you say, I can't say the bleed happened within 1 hour or 20 minutes, or 20 minutes. I correlate my findings with what clinically is going on with the case. You said that?
Correct.
Okay. So in the Brad Young, you're talking about hours, right?
Correct, 'cause
Right.
the injuries in this child were very different than the injuries in the current case.
Okay. On direct, talking about this case, you said an hour, 20 minutes. Yes? Yes? On direct?
No, what I was saying is I can't look strictly at the imaging and say when those injuries occurred.
Okay.
That's why you have to correlate with the child's physical examination and say, these are significant injuries, just like a kid who's involved in a motor vehicle accident. I can't look at it and say the motor vehicle accident occurred today or yesterday,
Okay.
but I can tell you from the time those injuries occurred, that child would not be normal.
All right,
So then it's up to the investigators to figure out when was the child last normal. I don't see the patients, I don't examine them. I can't look at the imaging and say, because it's white blood, it happened
All right.
in the last day or two.
Let me understand this then.
So you have to look at the whole picture.
All right. You have to look at the whole picture, which would include things that occurred out in the world on Shank Road that you weren't present to see. Yes? Answer yes or no. Yes?
Shank Road, is that where
So
this
this is
occurred?
where this happened,
Yes, I was not there,
All right.
absolutely.
And you have to rely on, you said, the investigators and witnesses to discuss when the child was last normal. Yes?
Correct.
Because that correlates with your reading of the images in this case, correct?
If we look at timing as far as what I think caused the injuries, that's not necessarily the same thing. If we're strictly looking at the timing, yes, I have to correlate with the clinical findings as to when the child was last normal.
Okay, well, witness statements and the like aren't clinical findings, right? Doctors don't give those. Witnesses give those, yes?
Correct,
Okay.
yes,
And witnesses don't always tell the truth, yes?
correct.
Okay, and so you're relying on things that were presented to you that aren't medical judgments, that were presented by people at the scene as to when they observed her to be last normal, yes?
To a certain extent, but I also have the medical information that occurred at Fort Hamilton and how she progressed even between the transport from Fort Hamilton to our hospital, how her symptoms were progressing.
Right.
But yes, prior to her arrival at Fort Hamilton, I have to rely on other people.
Okay, so you're a radiologist, yes?
Yes,
You went to medical school, yes?
yes,
You did a residency in radiology, yes?
yes.
You did a fellowship in radiology, yes?
Pediatric radiology and neuroradiology,
Okay, and you've been a practicing radiologist, yes?
yes.
And you just told the jury that just by doing your work as a radiologist reading scans, you can't time the injury, yes?
By strictly looking at the imaging, no,
Right. And that's what you're an
unfortunately,
expert at, looking at the imaging, right?
unfortunately, we can't. We're not that good.
Okay, and you're not a mind reader, right?
Correct?
You can't travel through time to go to a scene and see what happened.
Correct.
So on the basis of your expertise looking at scans, you're kind of at a loss for time. Yes?
Not necessarily. I mean, I can tell looking at this child's brain, these injuries did not occur days ago, just by the
Okay.
look of the brain.
All right. So based on your...
So there's, and again, we can look at the series of exams to see the progression of the child's injuries to know, yes, there is some timing, so, correct. But I
Right.
can't say it occurred at 6:45 a.m. or
Right.
9:45 a.m., correct.
Okay. All right. do you have the images of the slide? Let's move on from time. Do you have the images of the slideshow? If you
Yes.
do, you have the image of the scan that showed swelling on the back of the scalp?
Yes.
Could you pull that for me?
Okay.
Is that the one? I'm going to go put it on the screen.
So it's the 15.
Take your time.
It's the fourth image, fourth slide.
Okay, just show me which one it is so I can pull it up. That one right there?
That's the blue arrows. Oh, yeah.
This one?
Correct. This is the back. This is
Alright.
the front of the head.
Okay, we'll show it to the jury. And then, there you go. Okay, I have in my hand State Exhibit 15. And I want to show the jury. Okay. I'm going to go back so you can see both images.
It's sideways.
Okay. All right. State Exhibit 15 is a scan. Yes? CT scan?
These are images from the CT scan from Fort Hamilton, yes.
All right. And they have the time, 8:09?
Correct.
Okay.
These were the images that were taken at Fort Hamilton and then put into our system, and then I've just screen captured basically select images.
Gotcha. And again, these are two images of Hannah's brain?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And you tell me if I'm wrong, but the right image with the arrow depicts what?
So this is swelling at the back of the head. This is depicting swelling on the left frontal or front of the head.
Okay. When you saw this, did you decide or conclude that the swelling in the back of the head was a concerning finding?
To be honest, neither one of them are all that significant amount of swelling.
Okay.
Kind of mild.
Okay. Do you know whether or not any bruising was identified at Children's Hospital to that particular area?
To be honest, no. I mean, I know the child had many bruises. I was called from the operating room and told the child had many bruises.
Okay. And I'm not talking about many bruises. I'm talking about any bruise that would be from State Exhibit 15. But not to mischaracterize, you just told the jury that you didn't find it to be a significant or problematic injury or finding.
The child, it shows me that the child has bruising. As to whether that amount of swelling is, I see that amount of swelling very frequently from short falls to the external. To me, it shows that there's been trauma to the external scalp, but it's not a massive amount of extracranial swelling, I think is what I was trying to say.
Okay. It wasn't brought attention to the Dr. Stevenson, the neurosurgeon, or any of the other
That would not affect anything he needed to do.
Okay. Hannah died on March 18th?
To be honest,
You don't know?
I don't know. I didn't really, a lot of the post-op stuff, once the child stops coming to radiology, we kind of,
You're aware?
I mean, I do know she had the skeletal survey, the coroner series after she died. And so
Okay.
I have looked at that imaging,
You looked at the skeletal imaging?
yes.
All right.
I didn't interpret the imaging, but I have reviewed it, yes,
As part of your review for this case?
yes.
Did you review the coroner's report or the pathology?
I have seen the coroner's report, yes.
And that was done by Dr. Dean? Dr. Dorothy Dean?
Yes.
Okay. And you're aware that on March the 20th, 2018, Dr. Dean alerted law enforcement that she uncovered, after shaving Hannah's had a severe raised and swollen bruise on the back of her head. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. So while you say it's non-concerning, Dr. Dean was concerned by the bruise, its location, and its size.
I think I need to clarify what concerning is. Again, when I'm looking at this imaging, I'm trying to guide surgical management. As far as making my diagnosis of abusive head injury, external bruising, yes, is very important.
Okay.
As far as guiding the neurosurgeon, I don't think Dr. Stevenson would care if the kid had external bruising, because his main goal is to get the skull opened up to decompress that extracranial or the subdural bleeding.
Okay, so there's
And
a-
that was my goal at that point. Obviously, I think it's important enough that I pointed it out in my report that the child had swelling. But as far as a significant medical issue at that point, no, that was not a significant medical or surgical issue at that point.
Okay. But to be specific, your report doesn't indicate a particular bruise on the back of the head as a significant one, right? You don't identify that bruise. Answer my question.
I
Do you
think
have
I
any-
do, but let me pull up my report. Extracranial soft tissue swelling overlying the right posterior parietal and left frontal bones, no fracture.
Have you seen the report authored by the pathologist that I've retained in this case?
I have.
All right. And you're aware of his opinion about the significance of this bruise? And that it was, are you aware of it or not? Are you
I
aware
would,
of it or not?
if I could see his report again, I have a copy of it, or if you have a copy of
All
it.
right. I
So
can-
I know what his conclusions were to a certain extent.
That you're aware that his conclusion is,
Objection, Your Honor.
Approach. Is that the questioning is going to reference the opinion of another expert that is anticipated to testify at this trial. Any testimony that you hear, if you do hear that testimony about that opinion, you will not be permitted to consider that opinion or any comments relating to them for the truth of the matter of the opinion itself. It is strictly going to be presented to further the cross-examination of this particular witness as to her opinions that she has offered here today. So with that, Mr. Fagan, I will let you proceed.
are you aware that the defense pathologist, Dr. Werner Spitz, opines that Hannah's fatal injury was represented by a severe bruise to the back of her head? Are you aware of that?
I don't think it's just the bruising to the back of her head that was the cause of her. I think he
I just asked if you were
agrees.
aware.
There is bruising, but I don't think he's even saying the bruising is the cause of her fatal injury. I think that is a sign that she had trauma to the back of her head.
That there was
Yes.
a single,
A single blow to the back of the head is
Yes.
what caused her problems,
Right.
yeah. But the
Yes.
actual soft tissue bruising is not the cause of her,
no,
Yeah.
it was the hematoma
Yes.
and the brain swelling.
correct,
And
yes.
he agrees with that, right?
Yeah.
Right. But you, when you evaluated this image and worked on her treatment from 3/8 to 3/8, 3/16, 18, it wasn't the focus of
That
concern
amount of
treatment.
brain or that amount of soft tissue swelling to me is very minor.
That's all I have. I'm done.
No redirect.
Thank you, Mr. Fagan, and thank you, Ms. Hiley. All right, with that, doctor, you are finished. Please watch your step. Also, do not discuss your testimony with any other participating witnesses. Is this witness potentially subject to recall?
Yes.
Okay, for potential rebuttal maybe, or some other usage.
You can leave.
You can leave, but you may be brought back again, and you would be under the same obligations of this. Doctor, thank you very much. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Just watch your step.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is 5:03, so I kind of told you the truth. We did go over a little bit of the 5 o'clock, but not nearly as much as could have been, obviously. So we are going to call that a day at this point. Please, at this point, you can now take off your lanyards. You have to take off your lanyards. Leave those in your chair. Leave your notepads in your chair. This room is locked and secure. No one else will have access to those or be permitted to review those in your absence. You are under the same continuing admonitions, especially now that you're going home and it's overnight. No posting about this case on the internet, no reading about this case on the internet, no discussing